I'm Amber, 28, and last Christmas changed everything. For years, I watched my younger sister Heather receive the lion's share of our parents' attention and generosity. As a graphic designer paying my own bills, I was proud of my independence, but it still hurt. That December, I drove my failing Honda to my parents' house, a special lottery ticket tucked in my purse as their gift. I never imagined how that ticket would transform my life when Heather got a brand new car and I got socks. Before I dive into what happened, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the overlooked sibling in your family. Trust me, this Christmas story doesn't end the way you think it will. Growing up in suburban Boston, the pattern was subtle at first. My parents, Richard and Karen Mitchell, never explicitly favored Heather, but their actions spoke volumes. When I earned straight A's in high school, they nodded approvingly. When Heather brought home B's, they celebrated with ice cream. When I got into college with a partial scholarship, they seemed pleased. When Heather got accepted to a local state school, they threw a party. "We're just so proud of both our girls," Mom would say whenever anyone pointed out the disparity. Dad would add, "Amber's always been so independent. She doesn't need the extra encouragement like Heather does." That was their justification. I was independent, self-sufficient, mature for my age. These sounded like compliments, but they became excuses for giving me less attention, less support, and yes, fewer resources. After graduating with honors in graphic design, I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm in Boston. The pay wasn't exceptional, but it was enough to rent a small one-bedroom apartment about 30 minutes from my parents' home. I bought my own furniture, paid my own utilities, and managed my student loans without asking for help. Meanwhile, at 25, Heather still lived at home. She was taking classes part-time at the local community college, working occasional shifts at a boutique downtown, and spending most evenings going out with friends. My parents covered her tuition, gave her spending money, and never asked for rent. "Your sister is still finding herself," Mom would explain when I hinted at the unfairness. "College is harder for her than it was for you." My 10-year-old Honda Civic had been giving me trouble for months. The transmission was slipping, the air conditioning had died during the previous summer, and the check engine light had become a permanent fixture on my dashboard. 3 months before Christmas, I'd spent nearly $2,000 on repairs, money I'd been saving for a vacation. But I needed reliable transportation to get to work, so vacation plans went on hold. "Maybe it's time to think about a new car," Dad suggested during a Sunday dinner in November. I explained that I couldn't afford car payments while also paying off student loans. "You'll figure it out," he said with a pat on my shoulder. "You always do." The previous Christmas had been typical of our family gift exchange. I received a sweater, a gift card to a coffee shop, and a scarf. Heather received a MacBook Pro, designer boots, and a weekend trip to New York City. Heather needed a new computer for school, Mom had explained without me even asking. "And you already have that nice laptop from your job." It was true, my company had provided me with a decent laptop. But the disparities still stung. Despite everything, I looked forward to Christmas. Family was family, and I genuinely loved them, even with their flaws. I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gifts despite my limited budget. For my parents, I'd continued our tradition of giving them a lottery ticket, but this year, I'd splurged on one of the $20 holiday scratchers instead of my usual $5 one. It wasn't much, but it was a small way of showing I was making progress financially. "This is the year," I told myself as I tucked the ticket into a small red envelope. "This is the year they'll see that I matter just as much." Little did I know how right and wrong I would be. The drive to my parents' house on Christmas Eve took nearly an hour instead of the usual 30 minutes. My Honda protested the entire way, making an ominous knocking sound whenever I accelerated past 50 miles per hour. Light snow had started falling and traffic crawled along the highway as holiday travelers made their way to family gatherings. I had my presents carefully wrapped in the back seat, Despite my tight budget, I'd managed to put together thoughtful gifts. For my parents, I'd created a personalized photo album chronicling our family history, with scanned photos from old albums and new digital prints arranged chronologically. It had taken weeks of secret coordination with relatives to gather all the images. For Heather, I'd made a set of handcrafted earrings and a matching necklace, having taken a jewelry-making class specifically to create something unique for her. The lottery ticket was a last-minute addition, a family tradition that had started when I was in college. Back then, it had been a joke, a what-if dream of winning big. Now, it felt more significant somehow. When I finally pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was already alive with activity. Lights twinkled from every window, and the large inflatable Santa on the lawn waved mechanically in the gentle snow. Before I could even grab my bags from the trunk, the front door swung open. "Amber's here," Mom called out, waving enthusiastically from the doorway. She wore her traditional Christmas apron, dusted with flour and sprinkled with what looked like cookie dough. Come in, come in. You're just in time to help with the pies." The house smelled of cinnamon, pine, and roasting turkey, the sense of childhood Christmas that never failed to bring a smile to my face. Dad emerged from the living room, glass of eggnog in hand. "There's my girl," he said, giving me a one-armed hug. "How's that car holding up? Made it here in one piece, I see." "Barely," I admitted, stamping snow from my boots. "But it got me here." "That's all that matters," he replied, already turning back toward the TV where a football game played. "Your Aunt Jessica and Uncle Greg are in the kitchen with your mom. The Johnsons are coming later, and your cousin Taylor brought her new boyfriend." I made my way to the kitchen, where Aunt Jessica immediately enveloped me in a perfumed embrace. "Look at you, all grown up and professional," she said, holding me at arm's length. "Still driving that old Honda, though?" I saw it sputtering in the driveway. "You know, your cousin Michael just got a great deal on a lease." "The Honda's fine," I said with a forced smile. "Just needs a little TLC." Uncle Greg chuckled from his seat at the breakfast bar. "TLC and probably a new transmission. Cars aren't meant to last forever, kiddo." Mom handed me an apron. "Amber's doing just fine. She's always been so responsible with her money, haven't you, honey?" Not everyone needs a new car every few years. I tied the apron around my waist, wondering if Mom's comment was directed at Uncle Greg's tendency to lease new vehicles regularly, or if it was her way of justifying why they hadn't helped me with my car situation. "Where's Heather?" I asked, changing the subject as I began rolling out pie dough. "Oh, she's running late," Mom said with a fond smile. "You know your sister. She texted a while ago saying she was finishing up some last-minute shopping." Of course she was. Heather was chronically late to family gatherings, but instead of frustration, her tardiness was met with indulgent smiles and comments about her busy social life. I was elbow-deep in apple pie filling when the front door burst open, accompanied by Heather's melodic laugh and the rustle of shopping bags. "I'm here," she announced, as if her arrival was the official start of Christmas. "And I brought dessert from Magnolia Bakery." Mom rushed to help her with the bags. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to do that. I know how busy you've been." Dad emerged from the living room again, this time with a much more enthusiastic greeting than I'd received. "There's my Christmas angel. Come give your old man a hug." Heather dramatically dropped her bags and launched herself into Dad's arms. At 25, my sister still had the ability to transform into a daddy's girl at the drop of a hat. With her perfectly highlighted hair, designer jeans, and an expensive-looking new coat, she looked like she'd stepped out of a Christmas catalog. "I got stuck in the worst traffic," she explained as she shed her coat, revealing a festive red sweater that looked brand new. "And then the lines at the mall were insane. But I couldn't show up without presents for everyone." "You already got everyone presents last week," Mom reminded her, gesturing to the pile of beautifully wrapped packages under the tree, packages I knew my parents had funded. "These are extras," Heather said with a wink. Just a few little things I saw and couldn't resist. Dinner preparation continued, with Heather flitting between helping and socializing, while I steadily worked on the pies, sides, and table setting. The extended family arrived, the Johnsons from next door, Cousin Taylor with her new boyfriend Chad, and my dad's work colleague Bill with his wife Susan. During dinner, conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Heather's animated stories about her friends, her classes, and her plans for the future. When asked about my work, I started to explain an exciting new campaign I was designing, but was quickly interrupted by Uncle Greg. "Speaking of design, Heather, didn't you say you were thinking of taking some art classes next semester?" he asked, effectively redirecting the conversation back to my sister. "Oh, yeah. I'm thinking of maybe minoring in graphic design," Heather said, glancing at me. "Amber makes it look so fun, and I've always been creative." Mom beamed. Heather's professor said she has a natural eye for aesthetics. She got an A on her visual arts elective last semester. I took a long sip of wine, remembering my straight A's in my design program and the internships I'd worked while earning my degree. But I said nothing. As dinner wound down, Heather mentioned she was struggling with her business course. "I just don't understand why I need to take economics," she sighed. "It's so boring, and the professor is, like, ancient." "College isn't all fun and games, sweetheart," Dad said, but his tone was gentle. "But don't worry. Your mom and I were talking, and we think maybe you should reduce your course load next semester. No need to burn yourself out." I almost choked on my pie. When I'd been in college and expressed difficulty with a challenging course, my dad had simply said, "Buck up. That's what college is about." The disparity was becoming more glaring by the minute, and the evening had barely begun. In our family, Christmas Eve had always been the main event. After dinner was cleared and dessert had been served, we would gather in the living room for the gift exchange. It was a tradition that dated back to my grandparents' time: open presents on Christmas Eve, then spend Christmas Day relaxing and enjoying the gifts. The living room had been transformed into a holiday wonderland. The 7-foot tree twinkled with white lights and ornaments collected over decades, many of them handmade by Heather and me as children. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and Christmas music played softly from the speaker system. Outside, snow continued to fall, creating the perfect Christmas card seen through the bay window. Everyone found seats, the adults on couches and chairs, the younger kids. Taylor's boyfriend had brought his 10-year-old sister on cushions on the floor. Dad took his position by the tree, assuming his annual role as Santa, distributing gifts one by one. "As always, we go youngest to oldest," he announced, a policy that meant Heather had always opened her gifts before me throughout our lives. I sat on the window seat, slightly removed from the main circle, my glass of wine providing liquid courage for what I suspected would be another exercise in masked disappointment. The red envelope with the lottery ticket felt heavy in my sweater pocket. Dad began distributing gifts, starting with Chad's little sister Emma, who received books and toys from various family members. My gift to her, a handmade friendship bracelet kit, earned me a genuine smile of delight. When it came time for my presents to be opened, I watched nervously as each recipient unwrapped their gifts. The photo album for my parents received appreciative nods, but was quickly set aside. "We'll look through it later, honey," Mom promised, already reaching for the next package. The handcrafted jewelry for Heather earned a quick "Thanks, sis, it's cute" before she moved on to a much larger package from our parents. In contrast, Heather's gifts: expensive perfume for Mom, a premium whiskey set for Dad, designer scarves for the aunts and uncles, were met with exclamations of delight and multiple thanks. I knew without asking that our parents had funded these from Heather gifts, as they did every year. Then came the moment for me to open my presents. From Heather, I received a generic bath set that still had the clearance sticker partially visible on the bottom. From my parents, I unwrapped a pair of fuzzy socks, a coffee shop gift card for $25, and a knit hat. Thanks, I said, trying to sound grateful. The hat will come in handy for sure. It's wool, Mom pointed out. I know how cold your apartment gets in winter. I nodded, thinking of how I kept my thermostat low to save on heating bills. My parents knew this because I'd mentioned it during Thanksgiving, explaining why I couldn't stay longer because I needed to get back to adjust my programmable thermostat so my pipes wouldn't freeze. Neither of them had offered to help with my heating bill, though they paid all of Heather's utilities. Now, Dad said with a dramatic flair, I think there's one more special gift here somewhere. He made a show of looking behind the tree, then produced a small box wrapped in silver paper with a delicate blue bow. Here it is. For Heather, from Mom and Dad. The room went quiet as Heather accepted the small box, her eyes wide with anticipation. She carefully removed the bow and unwrapped the paper, revealing a velvet jewelry box. When she opened it, instead of jewelry, a single car key rested on the satin interior. For a moment, she looked confused. Then realization dawned on her face. No way, she whispered, looking up at our parents. No way. Mom was already crying, happy tears streaming down her face. Dad was beaming with pride. It's out front, he said. Merry Christmas, Princess. The entire gathering moved en masse to the front door. Dad threw it open to reveal a brand new SUV in the driveway, complete with an enormous red bow on the roof. The snowfall provided the perfect backdrop for the gleaming white vehicle. It's a Lexus NX, Dad announced proudly. All-wheel drive for safety, all the latest features, and excellent fuel economy. Heather screamed with delight and ran out into the snow, not even bothering with a coat. The family followed, exclaiming over the vehicle's features as Heather jumped into the driver's seat and began exploring the interior. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. Fuzzy socks and a coffee gift card for me, a luxury SUV for my sister. My ancient Honda sat just a few feet away from Heather's new Lexus, looking even more pathetic by comparison. No one seemed to notice I wasn't participating in the celebration. They were all gathered around the car, watching as Heather adjusted seats and mirrors and tested the sound system. I quietly stepped back into the house, my chest tight with emotion. In the empty living room, discarded wrapping paper littered the floor. I picked up my modest gifts and placed them in my overnight bag. The red envelope with the lottery ticket seemed to mock me from my pocket. I headed to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. In the mirror, my reflection showed a woman trying desperately not to cry, mascara already beginning to smudge at the corners of my eyes. Don't, I whispered to myself. Don't give them the satisfaction. But the tears came anyway, hot and angry, streaming down my face as I sat on the edge of the bathtub. Outside, I could hear the continued exclamations of delight and the occasional honk of a car horn as Heather presumably tested out her new toy. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard everyone come back inside, laughter and excited chatter filling the house again. After splashing cold water on my face and reapplying my makeup, I rejoined the gathering with a practiced smile. No one asked where I'd been. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow outside. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning in my childhood bed, replaying the previous evening's events in my mind. The lottery ticket remained in its red envelope, still unfulfilled in its purpose. I'd been too upset to give it to my parents after the car reveal. Downstairs, the family was already gathered for breakfast. Mom had prepared her traditional Christmas morning spread, cinnamon rolls, egg casserole, bacon, and mimosas. Heather was regaling everyone with her plans for her new car. I'm going to take a road trip to New York with Madison and Kylie, she was saying as I entered the kitchen. The sound system is amazing, and it has this cool feature where it keeps you in your lane if you start to drift. Safety first, Dad said approvingly, refilling his coffee cup. That's why we chose that model. all the latest safety features. Good morning, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, honey, Mom replied, sliding a plate toward me. Sleep well. Before I could answer, Heather jumped in. I barely slept at all. I was too excited about the car. I kept looking out the window to make sure it was really there. Well, you'd better get used to it. Dad chuckled. It's all yours, payments and all. Well, we're covering the insurance, of course. I nearly choked on my coffee. You're covering her insurance too? There was a brief moment of awkward silence. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Well, yes, Mom finally said. Insurance for new drivers and new cars can be quite expensive. She's 25, I pointed out. Hardly a new driver. Dad cleared his throat. Amber, it's Christmas. Let's not get into all that. I took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions bubbling up inside me. I'm just trying to understand. You buy Heather a brand new Lexus and cover the insurance, while I'm driving a car that's falling apart and got socks for Christmas. Now, that's not fair, Mom protested. We got you the gift card too, and that nice hat. It's not about the hat, I said, my voice quiet but tense. It's about the disparity. It's about the fact that you've always given Heather more support, more gifts, more everything. Heather needs reliable transportation for school, Dad said defensively. You're doing well on your own. That's right, Mom added quickly. You're so independent, Amber. We're proud of that. So I'm being punished for being responsible? I asked, setting down my fork. While Heather gets rewarded for, what exactly? Living at home at 25? Taking 6 years to finish a 2-year degree program? That's not fair. Heather protested, her lower lip jutting out in a familiar pout. School is harder for me than it was for you. I looked at my sister, suddenly tired of the whole charade. Life is hard for everyone, Heather. The difference is, I've had to face that reality while you've been sheltered from it. The tension in the room was palpable. Aunt Jessica and Uncle Greg became intensely interested in their cinnamon rolls, while Taylor and Chad whispered about maybe going for a walk. I think I'm going to head home early, I announced, standing up from the table. I have some work to catch up on before tomorrow. On Christmas. Mom looked genuinely shocked. Can it wait? Not really, I lied, already heading upstairs to pack my overnight bag. 20 minutes later, I was saying stiff goodbyes in the foyer. Dad looked stern, Mom was teary-eyed, and Heather was sulking in the background. I walked out to my car, threw my bag in the backseat, and inserted the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. I tried again. The engine made a clicking sound but wouldn't turn over. Perfect, I muttered, resting my forehead against the steering wheel. Just perfect. A knock on my window startled me. Dad stood there, bundled in his winter coat. I rolled down the window manually. The electric controls had stopped working months ago. Car trouble, he asked, his breath fogging in the cold air. Looks like it. Pop the hood, I'll take a look. I did as instructed, though I knew it was probably futile. Dad spent a few minutes examining the engine, then closed the hood with a definitive thunk. Battery's dead, he pronounced. And, from the sound of it, your starter might be going too. You really need to take better care of this car, Amber. Something inside me snapped. Take better care? Dad, I've put every spare penny I have into maintaining this car. I work full-time, pay my own rent, my own student loans, my own everything. Meanwhile, Heather lives here rent-free, and you just bought her a Lexus. Dad's expression hardened. That's different. Your sister needs the help more than I do? I finished for him. Why? Because she's never been encouraged to stand on her own 2 feet? Because you and Mom have always swooped in to solve her problems instead of letting her face consequences. The front door opened, and Mom and Heather appeared on the porch, drawn by our raised voices. What's going on? Mom called out. Amber's car won't start, Dad replied. And she's upset about Heather's gift. I can drive you home in my new car, Heather offered with what seemed like genuine helpfulness, but came across as smug given the circumstances. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Of course you can. That would be the perfect end to this Christmas, wouldn't it? The successful daughter being driven home by the favored one in her brand new Lexus. Amber, Mom gasped. That's a terrible thing to say. Is it? Or is it just the truth no one in this family wants to acknowledge? I was shouting now, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. For as long as I can remember, Heather has gotten everything handed to her while I've had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. That is absolutely not true, Dad argued, his face reddening. We've always treated you girls equally. Equally. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. Let's do some math, Dad. Last year for Christmas, Heather got a MacBook Pro, designer boots, and a trip to New York. Approximate value, $3,500. I got a sweater, a scarf, and a gift card. Approximate value, $150. That sound equal to you? Mom was crying now. We don't love you any less, Amber. We just thought that I didn't need as much because I was doing well on my own. I finished for her. But did you ever stop to think that maybe I was doing well on my own because I had to? That maybe Heather isn't doing well because she's never had to? A painful silence followed my words. Even Heather looked taken aback. The truth is, I continued, my voice quieter now, Heather has been failing her classes, hasn't she? That's why you bought her the car. Another bribe, another attempt to motivate her when she should be motivating herself. The shocked look on my parents' faces confirmed my suspicion. How did you know that? Dad asked. I didn't for sure until just now, I admitted. But it fits the pattern. Heather struggles, you throw money and gifts at the problem instead of addressing the actual issues. Heather's face had turned crimson. That's not fair. I've been trying really hard. Have you? I challenged her. Or have you been coasting, knowing Mom and Dad will always bail you out? That's enough, Dad said firmly. Amber, you're upset about your car, and I understand that. But this attitude is completely unappreciated after everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I repeated incredulously. Dad, I put myself through college with scholarships and loans. I found my own apartment, bought my own car, built my own career. What exactly have you done for me lately? The hurt on his face made me regret my words immediately, but there was no taking them back. I'm calling a rideshare, I said, grabbing my phone again. I'll have someone come look at the car later this week. Don't be ridiculous, Mom protested. You can't leave like this. It's Christmas. Watch me, I replied, opening the rideshare app. As I waited for confirmation of my ride, my hand brushed against the red envelope in my pocket. The lottery ticket. In my anger, I pulled it out and tore it open. What's that? Heather asked. It was supposed to be Mom and Dad's Christmas gift, I explained, holding up the gold and red holiday scratcher. A tradition. Almost defiantly, I began scratching off the coating with my thumbnail. The symbols revealed themselves one by one. 3 matching snowflakes. Then 3 matching bells in another row. I kept scratching, barely registering what I was seeing until all the squares were revealed. Oh my God, I whispered, staring at the ticket. What is it? Mom asked, stepping closer. I looked up at my family, standing in the snow-covered driveway, and felt a strange calm wash over me. I won, I said simply. $50,000. The rideshare driver, a middle-aged woman named Marlene with a soothing voice and a car that smelled of vanilla air freshener, seemed to sense I wasn't in a chatty mood. She made a few pleasant comments about the beautiful Christmas weather, then left me to my thoughts as we drove through the snow-dusted streets of suburban Boston toward my apartment. In my lap, the lottery ticket felt impossibly light for something worth $50,000. I'd stuffed it into my wallet after showing it to my stunned family, ignoring their immediate change in demeanor. Dad had suddenly offered to jumpstart my car. Mom had insisted I stay for Christmas dinner. Even Heather had become solicitous, offering to help me research how to claim the winnings. I'd refused them all, maintaining a composed expression as I climbed into Marlene's Toyota Camry and waved a curt goodbye. Only now, as we traveled farther from my childhood home, did I allow myself to process what had happened. $50,000. Not millions, not enough to retire on or buy a mansion, but enough to change my immediate circumstances significantly. Enough to matter. Everything okay back there? Marlene asked, meeting my eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. You look like you've seen a ghost. I realized I'd been staring out the window with my mouth slightly open for the past 10 minutes. I just won some money, I said, surprising myself with the admission. On a lottery ticket. Marlene's eyebrows shot up. No kidding. That's amazing. Christmas miracle, huh? Something like that, I replied, a small smile finally finding its way to my lips. I was going to give the ticket to my parents, but then, things happened. Well, sounds like those things happened for a reason, Marlene said wisely. The universe works in mysterious ways. For the rest of the 40-minute drive, I gazed out the window at passing houses decorated for Christmas, families visible through windows opening presents or gathering for meals. I wondered how many of those families had their own hidden dynamics, their own unspoken resentments and favoritism. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from my family, but I silenced it. This moment, this revelation, was mine to process alone. By the time Marlene dropped me off at my apartment building, I had made a decision. The money, my money, would be used thoughtfully, deliberately. No impulse purchases, no frivolous spending. This windfall would be a foundation for the independent life I'd been building on my own all along. Inside my apartment, the silence was a welcome relief after the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours. I kicked off my boots, hung up my coat, and made myself a cup of hot chocolate, a small Christmas indulgence. Then I sat at my small kitchen table with a notebook and began to plan. According to the instructions on the back of the ticket, I would need to claim my winnings at the state lottery headquarters. They were closed for the holiday, but would reopen in 2 days. After taxes, I calculated I would receive around $35,000, still a significant sum. I divided the money mentally. $10,000 for a reliable used car. $15,000 to pay down student loans. $5,000 for an emergency fund. $5,000 for immediate quality of life improvements to my apartment. As I wrote these figures down, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. For years, I'd been juggling expenses, prioritizing needs over wants, watching every dollar. This money wouldn't solve all my problems, but it would provide a cushion, a breath of financial fresh air. My phone buzzed again. 17 missed calls, 29 text messages. I scrolled through them quickly. Mom, please call us. We're worried about you. Dad, let's talk about this like adults. Heather, OMG Amber, I can't believe you won. Call me. Mom, your father says we can help you invest that money wisely. Dad, you need to be careful with that kind of cash. People will try to take advantage. Heather, are you mad at me? It's not my fault they got me a car. I set the phone down without responding. They could wait. This time, my needs came first. Instead, I called my friend Jasmine, the one person I knew would understand without judgment. Merry Christmas, she answered cheerfully. How's the family circus? Jazz, you're not going to believe what happened, I said and proceeded to tell her everything. The car, the socks, the confrontation, and finally, the lottery win. Holy shit, was her eloquent response when I finished. That's like karma on steroids. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in days. I know, right? It's almost too perfect. So, what are you going to do? She asked. Besides tell your family to go pound sand, which they totally deserve, by the way. I've got a plan, I said, looking down at my notebook. Practical stuff mostly. Car loans, savings. Totally sensible and completely on brand for you, Jasmine observed. But what about the family situation? Are you going to tell them to kiss your financially improved ass, or what? I sighed, the humor fading. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to cut them off completely. Another part knows they're still my family, flawed as they are. Family doesn't have to mean putting up with toxic dynamics, Jasmine pointed out. Sometimes the healthiest thing is distance. I know, I agreed. And I'm definitely going to establish some boundaries. I just need to figure out what those look like. We talked for another hour, Jasmine's straight-talking perspective helping me sort through my tangled emotions. By the time we hung up, I had a clearer vision not just for the money, but for my relationship with my family moving forward. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of activity. I submitted my claim to the Lottery Commission, opened a separate savings account for the winnings, and researched reliable used cars. My phone continued to buzz with messages from my family, which I answered minimally and neutrally. I'm fine. Need some space. We'll be in touch soon. On the third day after Christmas, I visited a used car dealership recommended by Jasmine's brother, who was a mechanic. The saleswoman, Linda, was refreshingly straightforward, steering me away from flashy options toward practical vehicles with good safety ratings and fuel economy. This one just came in, she said, showing me a 3-year-old Honda Accord with low mileage. One owner, all maintenance records, no accidents. It's boring but bulletproof. I took it for a test drive, appreciating the smooth handling and quiet engine, such a contrast to my struggling Civic. The price tag of $17,000 was higher than my budget, but Linda worked with me on financing options that would allow me to pay it off quickly once my lottery winnings came through. I can put down $2,000 now, and the rest when the check clears, I explained. Linda raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you came into some money. Something like that, I said with a small smile. By the end of the day, I had signed the paperwork and arranged for the dealer to pick up my old Civic as a trade-in. The value was minimal, only $800, but it was better than nothing. Driving home in my new Accord, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the car itself and everything to do with making a sound decision for my future. This wasn't an impulse buy or a status symbol. It was a practical investment in reliable transportation that would serve me well for years to come. At home, I checked my phone to find a new text from Heather. So are you getting a Ferrari with your lottery money? LOL, just kidding. But seriously, what are you buying? Also, Mom and Dad are being weird and keep talking about you in hushed voices. Call me. I placed the phone face down on the table without responding. The constant notifications from my family had evolved from concern to curiosity to barely disguised interest in my financial windfall. Not once had any of them acknowledged the legitimacy of my feelings or the disparities I'd pointed out. A week after Christmas, as I was arranging for a company to come retrieve my old furniture, I decided to upgrade my sagging couch and rickety dining set with some of the quality of life portion of my winnings. My doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a glance through the peephole revealed the last people I expected to see, my parents, standing awkwardly in the hallway of my apartment building. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But they had likely seen the lights on from outside, and my new car, was visibly parked in my assigned spot. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Mom, Dad, this is unexpected. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. They stood there looking uncomfortable, Mom clutching her purse with white knuckles, Dad with his hands thrust deep in his coat pockets. Neither seemed to know quite what to say now that they were actually face-to-face with me. Can we come in? Mom finally asked. It's rather cold in the hallway. I stepped aside, allowing them to enter my small apartment. Their eyes immediately began cataloging the changes. The new charcoal gray sofa that had replaced my thrift store find. The solid wood dining table instead of the wobbly IKEA model I'd assembled myself in college. The new area rug that tied the living space together. You've been shopping, Dad observed, his tone carefully neutral. I have, I confirmed, closing the door behind them. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. The normalcy of the offer seemed to relieve them. Mom nodded eagerly and Dad murmured his thanks. I busied myself in the kitchen, using the moment to compose myself. Their unexpected appearance had caught me off guard, but I was determined to maintain the emotional boundaries I'd been establishing over the past week. "Your place looks nice," Mom commented as I handed her a mug. "Very adult." "It's always been adult, Mom," I replied. "You've just never really looked before." She flinched slightly but didn't argue the point. Instead, she took a sip of coffee and glanced at Dad, clearly hoping he would take the conversational lead. "We've been worried about you, Amber," he said, settling into one of my new dining chairs. "You haven't been answering our calls or texts. We thought something might be wrong." "I told you I needed space," I reminded him. "And that I'd be in touch when I was ready." "A week is a long time to go without speaking to your family," Mom interjected. "Especially after Christmas ended the way it did." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean after I discovered that my parents have been consistently favoring my sister for years, to the point of buying her a luxury vehicle while giving me socks?" Yes, I needed some time to process that. Dad's jaw tightened. "We came here to talk rationally, not to rehash old arguments." "Old arguments?" I repeated. "Dad, this happened a week ago. And it's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern that's defined our family dynamic for as long as I can remember." Before he could respond, a car horn honked outside. Mom moved to the window and peered out. "Is that a new car?" she asked, her voice rising with surprise. "In your parking spot?" "It is," I confirmed. "A used Honda Accord. Very practical, excellent safety ratings, good fuel economy." "You bought a car?" Dad seemed genuinely shocked. "Without consulting us." The absurdity of his reaction almost made me laugh. "Dad, I'm 28 years old. I don't need to consult you on my purchases. But with the lottery money." He began, then seemed to realize what he was revealing. I said softly. "Now we get to it. You didn't come here because you were worried about me. You came because you were worried about what I might do with the money." Mom turned from the window, her expression hurt. "That's not fair, Amber. We've been genuinely concerned." "Really?" "Because none of the texts or calls I received acknowledged how I might be feeling about the way I was treated at Christmas. It was all, call us, and let's talk, and be careful with that money." A heavy silence fell over the room. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication that spoke volumes. "We may not have handled things perfectly," Dad finally conceded. "But family helps family." "That's always been our philosophy." "Has it?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like family helps Heather." "Your sister needs more support," Mom insisted. "She's always struggled more than you have." "She struggles because you've never let her face consequences," I countered. "She fails a class, you hire her a tutor. She can't hold a job, you pay her bills. She wants a car, you buy her a Lexus. When have you ever made her stand on her own 2 feet?" Dad's face had grown increasingly red during my speech. "That's not fair. Heather has challenges." "So do I," I exclaimed, my composure finally cracking. "Everyone has challenges, Dad. The difference is, I've had to overcome mine on my own while watching Heather get everything handed to her." "We never meant to make you feel less important," Mom said, tears welling in her eyes. "We just thought you were doing so well, you didn't need the help." "Did you ever consider that maybe I was doing well because I had no choice?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "That maybe being ignored taught me to be self-sufficient out of necessity, not preference?" Neither of them seemed to have an answer for that. "Look," Dad said after a moment, clearly trying a different approach. "What's done is done. We can't change the past. But family is still family, and we should be supporting each other. With this lottery win, you have an opportunity to be generous." I stared at him, incredulous. "Generous? You think I should share the money with you and Heather?" "Well, not in those exact words," he backtracked, "but family helping family works both ways. And your sister's car insurance is quite expensive. Plus, with her tuition next semester." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, They were here to ask for money. Let me get this straight, I said, setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care. You buy Heather a luxury SUV, but can't afford the insurance. You promised to pay her tuition, but are looking for someone else to cover it. And that someone should be me, who you've consistently treated as an afterthought, because family helps family. Mom at least had the grace to look embarrassed. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. Because it is terrible, I confirmed. It's exactly the pattern I was talking about. Heather gets whatever she wants, consequences be damned, and everyone else is expected to pick up the pieces. Dad started to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. I've thought a lot about our family this past week, I continued. About my place in it, about the dynamics that have shaped us. And I've come to some decisions. I took a deep breath, centering myself before the words that would change our relationship forever. I'm not giving you or Heather any money. Not for insurance, not for tuition, not for anything. The lottery winnings are mine, and I'm using them responsibly to pay down debt, secure reliable transportation, and create a safety net for myself. But Dad began. I'm not finished, I said firmly. Going forward, I'm establishing clear boundaries. I love you both, and I want a relationship with you, but it has to be a healthy one based on mutual respect. That means acknowledging the favoritism that's occurred and working to change it. It means treating me as an equal member of this family, not just the independent one who needs less attention and support. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Heather. Did Mom and Dad find you? They're supposed to ask about helping with my insurance. The Lexus costs way more to insure than Dad thought, LOL. I turned the phone screen toward my parents so they could read the message. Mom closed her eyes briefly, while Dad's face flushed deeper. She doesn't know we're here, he claimed weakly. Stop lying, I said, suddenly exhausted by it all. Just stop. You came here hoping I'd share my winnings, specifically to cover costs related to Heather's new car. At least have the decency to be honest about it. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked at each other, then back at me, clearly at a loss for words. Finally, Mom spoke. We should go, she said quietly. This isn't going how we hoped. No, I imagine not, I agreed. As they gathered their coats, Dad made one last attempt. Think about what you're doing, Amber. Turning your back on family over money. I'm not turning my back on anyone, I interrupted. I'm simply refusing to participate in the dysfunctional patterns that have defined our family for too long. When you're ready to acknowledge the issues and work on them, I'll be here. Until then, I need to prioritize my own well-being. They left without further argument, the door closing behind them with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Heather, what did you say to Mom and Dad? She demanded when I answered. They just called me sounding super weird and saying something about me needing to develop independence or whatever. Are you not going to help with my insurance? That's so selfish, Amber. After everything they've done for us. Goodbye, Heather, I said calmly and ended the call. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I felt truly in control of my relationship with my family. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about respect, equality, and healthy boundaries. Things that should have been present all along, but now I had the courage to demand them. 6 months passed, bringing summer sunshine to replace winter's chill. My apartment windows stood open, a gentle breeze stirring the curtains I'd added during my modest renovation project. The lottery money had been spent exactly as planned. A reliable car, reduced student loan burden, emergency fund established, and small quality-of-life improvements to my living space. But the most significant changes weren't financial or material. They were internal and relational. After the confrontation with my parents, I'd maintained limited contact, brief, cordial text messages and occasional phone calls, but no visits. I declined Easter dinner, Mother's Day brunch, and a family vacation to Cape Cod. Each refusal was met first with guilt trips, then with anger, and finally with reluctant acceptance. Heather had been furious initially, bombarding me with accusatory texts and tearful phone calls. When manipulation failed to produce results, she'd switched tactics, alternating between ignoring me completely and making small, awkward attempts at reconciliation. My firm boundaries had forced my family to reckon with patterns they'd long taken for granted. It wasn't an easy process for any of us, but it was necessary. At work, my renewed focus had paid dividends. Free from the emotional drain of family drama, I'd thrown myself into creative projects, impressing clients and earning a promotion to senior designer 3 months ahead of schedule. The raise wasn't enormous, but it represented recognition of my talent and hard work, validation I'd long sought from my parents but now found in my professional life. My social circle had expanded too. Jasmine remained my closest confidant, but I'd also joined a hiking group and a book club, forming connections with people who knew me only as I was now, not as the perpetually overlooked older sister I'd been with my family. I'd even started dating someone, Ryan, a software engineer I'd met through the hiking group. Our relationship was still new, but refreshingly balanced. He respected my independence while offering genuine support when needed, a dynamic so different from the conditional love I'd grown up with that it had taken me weeks to trust it was real. In early June, a letter arrived from my parents, an actual paper letter in an envelope with a stamp, something so unexpected in the digital age that I'd nearly mistaken it for junk mail. Inside was a card, not for any special occasion, just a simple message written in my mother's neat handwriting. Dear Amber, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking these past months. The distance between us has been painful, but perhaps necessary. It's forced us to examine patterns we didn't even realize were there. We were wrong to treat you and Heather so differently all these years. What we saw as acknowledging your independence was, as you said, taking you for granted while enabling your sister's dependence. The different standards we set, the different expectations we held, they weren't fair to either of you. We can't change the past, but we can acknowledge it and try to do better going forward. If you're willing, we'd like to start rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. With love, Mom and Dad. I'd read the letter several times, emotions swirling. There was no mention of the lottery money, no subtle hints about financial help for Heather. Just acknowledgement and the beginning of amends. It wasn't a magical fix. One letter couldn't erase years of disparity. But it was a start, a step in the right direction that I hadn't been sure they'd ever take. My response had been measured, a brief note expressing appreciation for their reflection and openness to gradually rebuilding our relationship. I suggested meeting for coffee rather than diving straight into a family dinner, establishing neutral territory for our first face-to-face encounter in months. Heather's evolution had been less straightforward. Without our parents' constant cushioning, she'd faced some hard realities. The expense of maintaining her Lexus had quickly become overwhelming, and she'd ultimately traded it in for a more practical vehicle. She'd failed another course, but had taken responsibility rather than making excuses, signing up to repeat it in summer session. Last week, she texted me asking for advice on creating a budget. Not money, just guidance. It was the first time in our adult lives she'd approached me as an equal rather than a competitor or a potential resource. I'd sent her links to the same financial planning tools I'd used when starting out, along with an offer to review her draft if she wanted. Small steps, but meaningful ones. As I sat on my new, second-hand, but perfectly comfortable couch reflecting on these changes, my phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Coffee with Mom and Dad, 1 p.m. tomorrow. The anxiety I'd expected to feel didn't materialize. Instead, I found myself looking forward to seeing them, curious about the new dynamic we might create together. The power balance had shifted, not in my favor, necessarily, but toward equilibrium. I was no longer the overlooked daughter desperate for recognition. I was a confident woman willing to engage, but only on terms of mutual respect. The Christmas that had seemed so devastating had ultimately been transformative. Not because of the lottery win, though that had certainly helped in practical ways, but because it had pushed me to recognize my own worth and demand that others recognize it too. The lesson wasn't that money solves problems or that cutting off difficult family members is the answer. It was that healthy relationships require boundaries, honesty, and balance. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to disrupt harmful patterns rather than perpetuating them. The greatest gift I'd received wasn't the lottery winnings. It was the realization that I had the power to change my story, to stop accepting the role I'd been cast in and write a new part for myself. To recognize that while I couldn't control how others treated me, I could control how I responded to that treatment. As the evening sun cast long shadows across my living room floor, I opened my laptop to check my bank account. My emergency fund was fully funded, my student loans significantly reduced, and my monthly budget comfortably balanced. Financial security hadn't solved all my problems, but it had given me breathing room to address the emotional issues that money couldn't fix. Across town, my parents were probably preparing dinner, perhaps discussing our upcoming coffee meeting with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Heather was likely struggling with her summer course while simultaneously navigating the unfamiliar territory of financial responsibility. We were all works in progress, learning and growing in our separate but connected journeys. The Christmas card my parents had sent me after our confrontation sat on my bookshelf, not the generic one from the actual holiday, but a simple greeting card they'd sent in February with a handwritten note saying they were thinking of me. It represented the first tentative step toward healing, a small acknowledgement that I mattered enough to reach out to without an agenda. Some relationships can't be saved, and that's okay. Some patterns are too toxic to mend, but others can be reshaped with time, effort, and willingness to change. My family fell into the latter category, imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but worth the work of reconstruction. The journey wasn't over. We would make mistakes, fall back into old habits, need to reset, and try again. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like an equal participant in my family rather than an afterthought. Not because of a financial windfall or a dramatic confrontation, but because I'd finally recognized my own value and refused to accept anything less than the respect that value deserved. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who couldn't see their own patterns of favoritism? Drop a comment below sharing your experience, what worked, what didn't, and how it affected your relationships. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found my story helpful, and share with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stand up for your own worth.